Hello friends, how are you? I'm Arith Erger and today I'm going to talk about divination in the Germanic world. And no, I'm not going to teach you methods of divination. Not yet anyway. We are going to talk about on an historical and archaeological point of view. What we know from the sources. One of my patrons, Mr. Rob Maxwell, which is also an archaeologist, and his work is far more interesting than mine. I'm afraid I spend most of my time with dead Romans, and Mr. Maxwell works at Chernobyl. Awesome. Anyway, you want to know more about the religion of the Celts and the Scandinavians. So, this is a huge subject, obviously impossible to cover in one single video. So I decided to divide this into several videos. So you can expect throughout the rest of the year and more years to come videos about the religion of Celts and Germanic peoples. I don't often talk about the Celts, it's true, but I'm going to start doing it. So, this video today will be focused on one of the most important branches of religious practices of the ancient Germans and the Norse, which is divination. As I've explained previously on the video about names and terms for magic workers in the Scandinavian tradition, one of the terms that appears the most is spå. Spå is a noun meaning prophecy or revelation, and it's also a verb, to prophesy. In the sources we often find this term related to someone with the gift of second sight. Now, the entire essence of spå is to make interpretations from what is revealed to us. It's to guess based on the revelations, because in guesses hidden truths are revealed. Most of these revelations come in dreams, and maybe not that surprising, today this is still taken seriously. The ability to dream about hidden truth, in the sense that events to come can be revealed by those who possess certain powers, and then interpretations have to be made. Hidden truths concealed in dreams. It's not just dreams of the future, but also dreams of the past and of the present that contain information, and the hidden truth in them can be uncovered in various ways. How we uncover the hidden truth depends on certain skills and techniques that we use to make interpretations of dreams, visions, omens, etc. So the use of supernatural or magical means was also a way to foretell future events or to discover what is hidden from us. This also includes the work of an oracle, to discover the will of the gods and to receive a specific answer from them through means of divinatory methods. Divination was a major factor in the religion of the ancient Germans and Scandinavians before being converted to Christianity. In fact, divination was one of the most important spiritual practices within the religions of ancient peoples, also among the Greeks, Romans, Celts, Lusitanians, and so on. But today we are going to focus on the ancient Germans and the Norse. You might be wondering why I'm making a clear distinction between ancient Germans and Scandinavians or Norse. Because we are going to start exploring divination in Germania, continental Europe, before jumping into the Scandinavian peninsula and into Iceland. So let's start with the classical sources. Both Julius Caesar and Tacitus gave us certain accounts of the religion of the Germans. To these people, ancient Germans, it seems divination was of great importance within the tribe as a whole and within the family, in a more private environment. Mind that with archaeological evidences concerning ancient Germania, Tacitus and Julius Caesar's accounts are becoming more reliable because, indeed, the material culture concerning religious aspects of life can be found to a certain extent. So, ancient Germans relied on lots to make a decision. Lots as in to make a decision by choosing from a set of objects. So drawing lots was the main way of making a decision by let fate decide the outcome. A branch was cut off from a tree bearing nuts, possibly oak, beech or hazel. The branch was cut into various strips, marking with different signs and then thrown into a white cloth. Now, we might be in the presence of an early usage of what we call today rune staves. The consultation for the tribe was held by the priest of the tribe, and the consultation within the family nucleus was done by the father. In both cases, there would be a prayer to the gods while looking up at the sky and picking up 3 strips one at a time and reading their meanings from the signs that had been previously drawn on each stave. Now, every decision depended on the interpretation of the signs. If the lots forbade something, well, nothing was to be done, of course. But if there was the confirmation to do something, further confirmation was needed by the taking of auspices, meaning more work of divination just to make sure. Obviously, we are not sure what these signs were, but we can assume with certain confidence that such signs might have been similar to the runic symbols, which were being used in this same manner at least since the 3rd century. And Tacitus' accounts are from the 1st century, after the Common Era, of course. But it seems reasonable to assume we are on the presence of runic symbols, since runes were inscribed in all sorts of surfaces to compose names, inscriptions, incantations, prayers, spells, as I have demonstrated on the video about talismans in the Norse culture, Norse witchcraft. Certain talismans simply disappear from the archaeological record, the ones made of perishable materials. And these lots with signs are a pretty good example of that. Most likely, these strips had runes on them, since each sign had its own unique name and each represented something. So obviously, the runes were well suited for this kind of divinatory work. So, just imagine pulling out 3 different runes, and an interpretation could be made based on the meaning of each and the link between them. And of course, putting it all together to form the answer to the question asked. It seems the number 3 was of great importance, and we continue to see later on in the elder Futhark and even in the younger Futhark, when in the Viking Age in Scandinavia the signs were reduced in number. Each evolution of the Futhark throughout history has always been divided into 3 rows. It's a rule. The drawing of lots and the number 3 was taken into consideration and was a reliable method when selecting human victims for sacrifice. The lots were cast 3 times to decide whether or not one person should be put to death by burning, or so Julius Caesar tells us. We also have accounts of casting lots 3 times a day for 3 days. So the number 3 is always present, and according to the sources, the bigger the decision that had to be made, the more the lots would be cast for a longer period, always multiplying the number 3 over itself. Short questions and answers, picking up 3 staves. Difficult decisions of life and death, casting the lots 3 times. Now, bigger decisions made by kings, as we have in the account of Saint Willibrord, an Anglo-Saxon missionary in Germany, that didn't behave appropriately in the eyes of the pagans, and the king of those pagans had to make a big and important decision for his people, because the gods would be angry with Saint Willibrord's behavior. The king cast the lots 3 times a day for 3 days to decide who he was going to sacrifice among the group of people Willibrord had converted and baptized in sacred waters, including Willibrord himself. The Anglo-Saxon Christian missionary had defiled holy and sacred waters and killed sacred cattle. This is more or less like the account I have mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, in the video, the cult of Odin. The account of King Vikar, a ruler of Norway. King Vikar promised to give a human sacrifice to Odin in exchange for a favorable wind, and so lots were drawn to find out who should die. And oops, the winner was the king himself. He got a ticket to Valhalla. King Vikar was marked for death and was hanged and stabbed as Odin asked. So, this tradition among Germans and Norse not only required interpretation of the signs and their meanings, but it all seems to rely very much on fate and in the decision of the gods. It wasn't just the male figure, priest of the tribe or father of the family among ancient Germans that had a role to play on divinatory aspects. When it came to determine whether it was the will of the gods to go to battle or not, in most of these occasions it was up to the older women of the tribe to cast the lots and use divinatory methods. In relation to the tribe, it was the wife of the chieftain who played this role, and among the family it was the matriarch, or the mother, or the oldest woman within the family. Going to war was obviously a big decision, so the ancient Germans took the decisions and interpretations so seriously that even if they clearly had the numbers and had advantage over their enemies, they would not engage in war if oracle women prophesied that they should wait or simply not go. The will of the gods spoke through these women, and many of these women were held in such honor and revered in such a way as if they were goddesses, like the case of Valeda and Aurinia. Valeda was a priestess, prophet and seer of the Bructeri, a Germanic tribe. She was whom prophesied and presided over a tribal Germanic insurrection against the Roman rule between the years of 69 and 70 of the Common Era. Valeda seems to be a Germanic title and not her own name. She and Aurinia are mentioned in Tacitus' book Germania. And in fact, Tacitus describes how the Germanic peoples in general regarded their women. The ancient Germans thought about their women as having something sacred and prophetic about them. So they did not despise their counsels nor turn away their answers. The prophetesses among the ancient Germans were revered like deities. Not that they were considered actual goddesses, but they were worshipped in the same manner the Germans worshipped goddesses, deities in general. Germanic women were revered and protected as much as possible by the Germanic peoples. They were seen as being magical in nature, linked to the divine. Even when men were wounded, the first thing they did was to show their wounds to the women of their tribe or of their own family, so they could heal them and take care of them. Women had an important role in the Norse and in the Germanic societies, especially the tribes from Central Europe. There are archaeological evidences that Germanic women helped in the defense of the borders in the Rhine, which is the natural border between the Germanic tribes and the Roman Empire. It's no coincidence the Lombards praised women so much, and the entire mythology on how they became Lombards in the first place, long beards, is precisely from the account that these Germanic women knotted their long hairs around their faces to resemble men with long beards. The Lombards praised the goddess Freya, which later on in Scandinavia would become the equivalent of Frigg or Frigga. And so their women would go to war disguised as men. Apparently, the Lombards were a matriarchal society mainly composed by warrior women, which is also why these are one of the very few Germanic tribes whose folk magic was better preserved than any other society or culture of the past, precisely because women held the magical religious power. And the society governed by women, it's perfectly natural that their doings were better preserved, unlike in a patriarchal society where only the male activities were preserved. This is one of the main reasons why most folk magic was lost, because in history what is preserved are the activities held by the elites. If a society was patriarchal, what will remain in the spotlight, so to speak, will be patriarchal activity. While if a society was matriarchal, more of the matriarchal activity will be in focus. In ancient pagan societies, at least European ones, the magical and the religious was mostly governed by women. The casting of lots was fairly common among the Germans, also among the Danes and the Swedes, and of course that practice spread to other regions. An interesting aspect concerning casting the lots, or picking them up with signs on them, possibly the runes, is that this is very similar to the accounts of the god Hudan, Odin himself, and in how he obtained the runes. As you know, in the Alvamal, a Norse mythological poem of the Viking Age, Odin hanged himself on a tree as a sacrifice and remained in there for 9 nights without food or drink and pierced by a spear. Notice the multiplication of the number 3 times. But there is a particular passage that I quote, and it's Odin himself speaking. I peered downwards, I took up the runes, lifted them up, screaming, then I fell back. We can obviously make many interpretations from this particular passage, but it's fairly plausible to say that the god of death and inspiration in here is performing the same ritual of casting lots, or the consultation of runes or staves with runic signs. But mind that this is during his own sacrifice. So not only he is establishing the ritual of divination through runes, but also through sacrifice itself. In Old Icelandic we have the term blótspan, which is a sacrificial slip of wood, and the term láuthin, which is a sacrificial blood twig, which are pieces of wood that serve as lots, as objects for divinatory purposes. And as we have seen on the previous video about Norse talismans, the term thin serves to characterize a talisman made of wood with runic inscriptions on it. So these are not random pieces of wood, but somehow consecrated for the purpose, through ritual and sacrifice, hence being described as sacrificial blood twigs or sacrificial slips of wood. Maybe the signs on these twigs, the runic symbols, were reddened with blood to give them potency, the human component necessary for a talismanic object to work, by giving it essence, life, as I've explained on the video about talismans. Please watch that one and you might better understand this connection. Odin, in this part of the poem, lifted up the runes, as priests would do, towards the sky, and he lifts them screaming. In some accounts of Old Norse literature, including in the Avamál itself, we have poets and sages said to be mighty and knowledgeable on the runes and signs, which are signs of great power and strength that the sage or poet or whoever is very eloquent and knowledgeable in runes paints the runic symbols that were carved by the high powers, and while painting them and carving them, they utter their words and meanings and intentions. The entire process of creating runic talismans, to carve and paint the signs and through galdr imbue the object with power. Screaming the incantations, singing the incantations. And galdr quite possibly was also one of the techniques used in divinatory methods, or at least in the creation of the blótspan or láuthin, to consecrate in ritual with singing incantations, carving and painting with blood, the objects that would be used for casting lots for divinatory purposes. In a subtle way, I just told you how to create and consecrate rune staves for divinatory purposes. Shh. To the ancient Germans, it wasn't just about consecrated twigs. Animals were also used for divinatory purposes. The Germans believed that horses were sacred to the gods, white horses to be more precise, which were kept in a sacred grove. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to talk about augury through the entrails of animals. Not today. The ancient Germans would harness the horses to a special chariot and observed the horse's behavior and made an interpretation of the will of the gods based on what they observed. The divine power was expressed in the animals, and so their behavior was as if the gods themselves were behaving as well, through the horses. The gods made their will known through these animals. The thing is, the divine would manifest itself. The divine presence was manifested through the horses and the chariot. The chariot was empty. It wouldn't have a human rider. The chariot was meant for the divine to make its presence manifest in it and ride the chariot and command the horses. It was up to the priests to look for the divine manifestation and make the interpretations once the divine presence rode on the chariot. This type of religious activity was also recorded, for instance, in the cult of Nerthos. The wagon of Nerthos would be left empty or contained only a symbol of the deity in question until the priests of Nerthos, through some unknown means, would recognize the presence of the deity in the wagon, and so they knew when it was time to start and set out for the yearly procession around the region. This was also a religious tradition in Sweden at Uppsala, which I might explore later on, perhaps on a video just about horses. It wasn't just divination through horses. Bird augury was also a thing among the ancient Germans. But almost every ancient pagan European culture did that at some point in history, especially the Romans, Celts, and the Lusitanians. So, predicting the future through the behavior and flight of birds, which continued to be a practice up until the Viking Age in Scandinavia. Both Germans, continental Germans, and Norse would observe mostly crows, ravens, and eagles for some kind of omen. Ravens, for instance, before a battle, were considered to be a sign of victory. As I have mentioned on the video about the first Icelandic settlers, one of the very first men to arrive in Iceland was a man named Floki Vilgarðarson. He took 3 ravens with him on his way from Norway to Iceland. When he wanted to know which course to follow, he released the ravens one by one, so in their behavior and flight he would know how to proceed and in which direction to sail. This is just one example. You can find several examples of turning to ravens and other birds for guidance in Icelandic poems and sagas. In the Volsunga saga, Sigurdur, after defeating the dragon and having a taste of the dragon's heart, tasty, he gained the ability to understand the speech of birds. And right after this event, he receives counsel from 2 birds upon a tree that warn him about Regin's treachery. Several other figures in the Old Norse poetry and sagas have the ability to understand the speech of birds and receive counsel from them. This is likely a reference to those who could make interpretations from the flight and behavior of birds. And in many occasions throughout Norse mythology, the gods take on a bird form, mostly the hawk and the eagle, considered to be noble birds in Scandinavian tradition. So these mythological accounts, poems and sagas, are almost romanticized accounts of an earlier tradition of the practice of divination by observing birds. A tradition that died out precisely when oral tradition was being written down or put to parchment. So it was a way to preserve the accounts of these traditional religious practices. Mind that this goes much deeper than it seems. We know that various Indo-European peoples believe that the soul of a person, mostly of dead warriors, would be carried into the heavens by birds. In what is nowadays Portugal, the Bronze Age peoples would bring the dead, the great majority were dead warriors, into high places and leave them there so that birds would take them, bit by bit, into the afterlife. The tradition of the blood eagle in Northern Europe might have been just that. not gruesomely torturing a person and pulling the lungs out from the back, but the blood eagle might have been to leave someone in a high place to be eaten by the eagle or other birds of prey, as we have in the classical Greek tradition of Prometheus bound to a rock, where each day an eagle would feed on his liver. The eagle is the symbol of the gods. Many birds were. And in India, this tradition in some places is still kept alive, the dead being taken into the afterlife by birds of prey. We have both archaeological and artistic evidences that the concept of the wandering soul in bird form was also known in Northern Europe. So divination through the behavior and flight of birds and their cries might come from an even older tradition of finding guidance through birds, because it was a method to maintain communication with the dead. The wandering souls in bird form, continuing to provide guidance to the living. One of these days I might explore this a bit more when talking about the god Hjörnir, which I believe to be a bird god from Norse mythology. Tacitus informs us of another interesting method of divination, by duels. The duel between two men before a battle. Ancient Germans would get one man from the region they were at war with and another man from their own region, harm them with their national weapons and watch them fight in a duel. Whoever was victorious gave the prediction of the war to come. As I have said in the video about Viking duels, Holmgang, it was believed that the gods were present during these duels. They were called upon as witnesses. The victor was seen as the person who had the favor of the gods, and luck in battle was on his side. So this is pretty much the essence of it to the ancient Germans as well. The one who emerged victorious was the man who possessed greater luck and power, and therefore his people could rely on divine favor. As I have said previously on the video of Holmgang and also the one on Viking justice, the official duel was also recognized as a means of settling a dispute within the community, and it's referred to in the laws of various Germanic peoples from the 6th century and continued to remain in their laws up until later times, and a custom brought into Scandinavia, which was still practiced in Norway and Iceland before the conversion. This duel wasn't the same thing as the Christian concept of trial by combat to determine someone's innocence because God stood on that person's side. To Germanic peoples, it was a means of finding out which of the two men had luck on his side, and therefore most likely that person possessed the favor of the divine powers. It wasn't to determine innocence or guilt, just to determine the luck and the favor of the gods. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I'll stop the video in here because there is much to say about Cyrus's concerning divination in the Germanic world. I've already given you a taste of it, but I'll make a video solely about that. Otherwise, we would be here for more than an hour. So I hope I can count with your presence in our next lesson. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. I'm counting on you. And as always, tak for real.